Hey BookTube! I know this video is kind of late, but that's because I filmed this once already and I just hated the video, so I'm doing it again. So today is going to be my August wrap up, and I think I read 5 books in the month of August, which I thought coming off the back of Medievalathon I was going to get so much reading done. It did not go like that, but I do still think I had a very good reading month in terms of the quality of the books that I did read, so I mean that's something, at least. I would rather read one 5-star book than 10 1-star books. Also, I did rearrange my shelves. I did film that video. I also hated that video. It may or may not come out, but I forget where everything is, so I feel like this is going to take me a really long time to find all the books that I read, because now I don't know where I put them. Okay, so the first book that I read in August was The Song of Achilles by Madeline Miller. I actually studied the classics in my sixth form college, so I was kind of surprised that I never picked this up before now, because I love Greek stories and literature and the myths and the legends, and I just really enjoy like ancient Greek myths. And I don't know, it's just not something that I tend to read a lot of, and I don't know why, because I do really love the genre. So yeah, I'm surprised it took me as long as it did to actually pick this book up and start reading it. But for those of you who don't know, this book follows the story of Achilles, and it's his life from when he was a boy up until the events of the war at Troy. So I'm assuming that if people haven't read the Iliad, which is like the story of Troy, you probably still know most of what happened there, I guess. But I'm not going to spoil it there just in case anybody doesn't know. This book is told from the perspective of Patroclus, who is, in this version, he's actually Achilles' lover. And it sort of just tells the story of how they meet, how they grow up together, and then the events of Troy. So when I went into this, I was obviously very familiar with the Iliad and the story of what happened at Troy, so I was fully prepared for the way that I knew this book was going to end. But let me just tell you, this book broke me. This book crushed me. This book just took all of my feelings and absolutely destroyed them, and I was a mess. I have a vlog up in which I just finished reading this book, and you can tell I was a mess. I don't normally tend to get that emotionally invested in the characters, but even just like the last paragraph, the last few lines of this book, the last page, I read it over and over and over again. I guess because like I hate myself and like I want to suffer reading the pain, but yeah, no, this book was just fantastic. I loved it. I guess I really do just like to suffer. So I actually rated this book 5 out of 5 stars. I really love the way that Madeline Miller writes, and just sort of like the little callbacks to sort of like the original myth and like things you may have read in the original text, particularly with Odysseus's character. And just like, I don't know, you don't have to have read any of the Greek classics to go into this. I feel like it's very accessible, and it's written in like a really accessible way. But if you have read the classics, there are like little nods to Homer here and there, and it's just, I really enjoyed those parts. It's not often that a book has this big of an impact on me, so I did have to rate it 5 out of 5 stars, and I really did love it. It had such a feel of summer, maybe because it was like August time while I was reading this. I basically immediately wanted to reread this the second that I finished it, and it was really a struggle over the next few weeks not to just pick it up all over again. But I really think that I'm probably definitely going to revisit this, like I think every summer from now on. This is just like such a beautiful, heartbreaking summer read for me, and yeah, it's definitely one that I can see myself reading again and again. And yeah, if you haven't picked this up and you want like a really nice modernized Greek classic, then just please, like, just do yourself a favor and pick this up, because it's absolutely just wonderful. After that, I really needed just something of like an emotional life preserver to read, so I moved on to Kings of the Wild by Nicholas Eames. So this book was a lot of fun. Essentially, in this world, mercenary bands are kind of treated with like the same fandom level as like rock stars in our world, and basically the most famous and badass mercenary band is now a bunch of old men, and they've all retired and settled down, and that is until their leader one day turns up at the door of one of his old bandmates, begging him to help him get the band back together for one last road trip to go and save his daughter, who is essentially trapped in a city under siege by like a horde of angry, horrible, terrible monsters. So that's like the basic setup, but it is a bunch of sad dads getting the band back together for one last road trip, which is like exactly my kind of thing. You know me, I love a bunch of sad old men. And this book has a lot of them. There's so many sad old men in this book, it's great. I feel like this is also really accessible fantasy, it's very like direct and down to earth, and you don't have to know a lot about like history or like the world building, or you don't have to know a lot of like the side of like fantasy literature that requires you to like know a lot of stuff and keep a lot of stuff in mind. You just don't need that for this. It's just very easy going and very accessible and a lot of fun. It reminded me sort of like a band of D&D characters, and obviously like there are other bands in this world as well, and I don't know, if you play D&D, let me know if you got a similar vibe reading this, because like that's kind of like how I felt about it. The fact that you would just walk through somewhere and they would encounter a really weird monster, and sometimes none of them would know what it was, and they just kill it because it's like, it has too many eyes, I think we should kill it. So yeah, it's really irreverent, a lot of fun, and like it doesn't take itself very seriously. There's a lot of jokes and a lot of humour in this, and it was just a really nice pick-me-up sort of read, a really nice easygoing fantasy, and it's very, very, very character driven. There is like a plot there, so like you're not like floundering around like waiting for a plot to happen. Like there's a very clear plot, like a clear goal, a clear aim, but it is all like character fueled. The best part of this book is the characters and like the found family trope like between all the bandmates, and it was just such a nice heartwarming tale, and I really enjoyed it, and not just because of the sad old men. So I think I rated this 4 stars, I think. Maybe like a 4.5. I can't quite recall exactly because it's been a while. But I did really enjoy this. It was at least a 4-star read for me. And so yeah, I'd highly recommend this one. And so after that, of course, I picked up Bloody Rose, which is the sequel to Kings of the Wild. And I can't really talk very much about this because it is obviously a sequel, so it does sort of follow on after the events of the first book, but it takes place with a different like bunch of characters, and like the plot, the story is connected, but like it's a different story. So I really enjoyed this one as well. It was really nice to like continue reading about the world and like how things have progressed and changed after the events of the first book. Without really going into spoilers, I can't really get into it, but I did really enjoy like the continuation. I will say I liked the first book more. It might just be because I enjoy those sort of characters more, again, with the old men. I think I just enjoyed like I guess the setup and the resolution of the first book more than I enjoyed it in this book, but I still rated this, I think, also a 4 stars, but like Kings of the Wild was a higher 4 stars than this, at least to me. So yeah, I definitely really liked this. It was a really nice continuation of the series. I kind of hope that maybe there's more to be written in this universe. I really like the world that's been set up there. I really enjoy it. But yeah, definitely 2 books that I would recommend. So the same night that I finished Bloody Rose, I still felt like I had some reading energy left in me, and so I picked up Silver in the Wood by Emily Tash. And this is like a spin on the Green Man mythos. The way I heard this described was that it's a male-male romance centering around like the Green Man myth, which it technically is, but I feel like that's a really minor aspect of like the story itself. But bearing in mind this is like just over 100 pages, and I read this in the space of I think like an hour. I just went and sat outside under like the fairy lights at night and read this in the dark with a load of like moths and stuff, and it was very atmospheric and very nice, and I really enjoyed reading this book. I will say I don't think I got a lot out of the story, and there's not a lot I can really tell you without going into spoilers because it is so short. But basically there is a man who lives in the woods and his name is Tobias. He's essentially what the locals have called like a wild man, or like a man of the woods. So like he tends to the woods and like its dryads and such. And one day in his little hut he sees a man outside caught in a storm, and he invites him in out of the storm, and it turns out that this young man is the new owner of the estate, which technically owns all the woodland that Tobias lives in. And they kind of start up like a friendship, and it just sort of goes from there. It's a very slow and not very eventful story. It just focuses on like this one thing. I really can't spoil it. But yeah, I did enjoy the story that was here, but because it's so short, like there wasn't really a lot to enjoy. There wasn't really a lot of time to like really connect to the characters or the plot. I mean, it is just sort of the nature of having such a short book, like that's just one of the things that happens. So I did enjoy this, but because there wasn't like enough there, I think I only rated this a 3 stars. Wasn't really anything wrong with it, it's just that I think I would have liked more like a deeper look into things, or a longer look at things, or like more exploration of it, I guess. It was like a really nice kind of interesting story, and I enjoyed what I read, and I think it was like the story itself was a good length. It's just there wasn't enough there to really make me rate it higher. And then the last book that I read in August was Blackwing by Ed McDonald. This book is so different to anything else I've read in like a really long time, and it was so refreshing, and I really enjoyed reading this. So like this is a fantasy, it's an adult fantasy, but it's very bleak, very grimdark. It's almost sort of post-apocalyptic, but like not quite. And I found it really interesting because everything in this world, like the magic and the electricity, all run on something called phos, which is essentially like phosphorescent moonlight. So you have this to power things like machinery and neon lighting, but it also is like the source of energy from which like the magic users like draw their power. So that was really cool, and like the world building itself is super interesting in this book. I won't really go like too much into it because it's really nice to just read it and find out for yourself, but essentially there's this place called the Misery, and it reminded me a bit of like the Wasteland in Fallout, but like turned up to like the extreme. And in this world there are like these kind of godlike beings called the Deep Kings, which essentially are like turning human beings into kind of like zombie-like creatures. And on the other side there are these like also kind of godlike beings but not quite as powerful as the Deep Kings, and they're called the Nameless. And essentially like humankind is kind of like just sort of trapped between like their fight, but I think we'd rather be on the side of the Nameless because they're the ones who don't necessarily want to turn us into all these like weird mindless drones. So like humanity does not live in like a very nice state right now. And with it being like very grimdark and bleak, the main character is this sort of morally grey like mercenary type dude, and his name is Galharrow, and he runs like a band of like little mercenaries, and when you first meet them they're on their way out into the Misery to essentially like behead these two, I guess, like enemies and bring them back and like get a bunch of coin for essentially delivering their heads. They're kind of like bounty hunters. But unlike most people, Galharrow is actually like I guess like a servant of one of the Nameless. So he has this like black raven tattoo on his forearm, and whenever the Nameless being called Crowfoot wants to get in contact with him, like an actual literal real live raven like bursts out of the flesh of his arm to talk to him in person. So that was very metal. I honestly think that like this was just a really refreshing read for me, and when I first started it, like the first few pages, I was so hooked. Like I was immediately hooked, and I loved the like really just dark, gritty, bleak tone. Like it's so depressing, but like I was just eating it up because I really like that, and it's been a while since I've read like a really grim, depressing story. But like in a good way. Like it does it really well. And I will say, when I first started reading it, like the first couple chapters, I was thinking like this has got to be a 5-star read. Like I was convinced that it was going to be a 5-star read, and it's not that the book got like bad or anything, it's just that I didn't quite have that like amazing excitement and like just the level of hooked I was in the first few pages, just the way that the story evolved over time. So it is like a mystery as well at its heart, and it's like it's a decent mystery as well. Like it's not just super easy to figure out, but like you can follow along. It doesn't just like bring stuff randomly out of nowhere. So like it's a satisfying grimdark fantasy mystery. But yeah, I think I rated this about a 4.5 overall. It was really good. I really enjoyed this, but it wasn't quite a 5 stars for me. It just didn't have like that something that made it a 5 stars for me. Like the feeling I had at the start was more than the feeling I had at the end. I couldn't rate it a 5 stars. Like it just didn't have that something, like that 5-star quality that like I don't know what it is, but I just know it wasn't quite a 5-star book. I do love this. I am super excited to carry on with this series. Like I'm definitely going to keep Ed McDonald like on my like top authors to like watch out for new releases for, because I really love this, and I'm really excited to read the rest of the series. I'm hoping I'm going to love it as much. Like maybe one of the other books in the series, I think it's a trilogy, and the last one I think has just come out, so like I think this has potential for like at least one of the books in the series to be a 5-star read for me. So like I'm very hyped to read the rest of this. And yeah, that was it. They were all the books that I read in August. Well, this section of my bookshelf got like completely decimated by all the books I took out of it. So yeah, these were the 5 books that I read. I feel like it's kind of a cheat because Silver in the Wood was so short that I basically read 4 books, but like, it's fine. It helps with my Goodreads challenge. So yeah, again, I'm sorry this video was so late considering we're now mid-September. But yeah, let me know what you thought. Have any of you read any of these books, and what did you think of them? As always, if you would like to leave a book recommendation based on the things that I have read and how I have rated things this month, then please do go ahead and leave that down in the comments down below. I hope you guys enjoyed this wrap up, and I will see you in the next video. Bye!